Now, Churchill was substantially to blame for the failure of the Norway campaign and was seen as a maverick. He was tainted by the failure of the Gallipoli campaign in the First World War and his actions during the 1926 general strike. He had been further tarnished for his support of Edward VIII in the abdication crisis. But he has energy and military experience and had served in India, the Sudan, and South Africa, as well as in the trenches of the First World War. The favourite to replace Chamberlain, however, was Halifax, who was hugely experienced and a former viceroy to India. But he was a member of the House of Lords, not of the House of Commons, and he had no military experience to speak of and didn't, in fact, want the job, crucially. Indeed, the very thought of being Prime Minister made him physically sick. Now, on the 10th of May 1940, as we start our tale, Reynard offered his resignation after just 7 weeks in office, after his efforts to replace Gamelin had been blocked by Daladier. When told, however, that the Germans had attacked in the west, he was then hurriedly made to withdraw his resignation, and the three men, Reynard, Daladier and Gamelin, would have to try and work together to halt the German attack. The French command was already in disarray at this key moment, however, as a new layer of command had been created between Gamelin and General Georges, commander of the North East Front, called GHQ Land Forces. To create this new layer of unnecessary command, staff officers had to be removed from Gamelin and George's command centres, breaking up teams that had got used to working well together and creating again this unnecessary bureaucratic layer. At 10 minutes past 5 in the morning, German paratroops landed in Belgium and the Netherlands to seize key bridges and fortifications. The Dutch army was very ill-equipped, with no tanks, little artillery, and mostly made up of part-time reservists. The Belgian army, however, was far better equipped, but their CNC had recently been sacked, as we discussed in a previous lecture, for being too pro-British and French and too hostile to the Germans, and so had been replaced. The Dutch Air Force was destroyed on the ground, while the key units defending the bridges, the Zwijndrecht bridges, just north of Breda, near Rotterdam, had no ammunition issued to them, and so they couldn't stop German paratroopers from seizing these vital bridges. German paratroopers also managed to seize the key Belgian fortress of Ibn Amal, an incredible piece of fortifications along the main route of the German advance, but adding gliders on the roof of the fortifications. Army Group B entered into Belgium, while Army Group A started its race through the Ardennes. The advance was covered by 1,500 bombers and 1,000 fighters. Now, on paper, the Luftwaffe had a strength of 5,446 planes, but in reality, its strength was 2,500, as the rest of them were not serviceable. This was perfectly normal. Aircraft are difficult to maintain and keep running, and so although on paper they have 5,446 planes, in reality they have 2,500 available for the battle. To oppose this, in terms of serviceable aircraft, the RAF have 500 aircraft combat ready, and the French have 900, but the French also have 1,700 combat ready aircraft held further away from the front lines to avoid them being destroyed on the ground, waiting for the Germans to attack before they're being committed. Very sensible in that regard. Told of the German attack, it finally arrived. Gamelin has to decide which plan to go for. Is he going to go for plan E, the most cautious of the advance? Is he going to go for plan D? Again, probably a nice balance. Or is he going to gamble all to gain what advantages he can and go for the Breda variant? Well, plan D is the one that's favoured, an 80-mile advance with 10 French and 5 British divisions. The Breda variant would require that extra 15 French divisions. It would require the entire French 7th Armée, and that is the strategic reserve. It would, however, link up with the Dutch as well as the Belgians, but it would be gambling everything on the Belgian invasion being the main German thrust, as that 7th French Army is the reserves. They're there to react to any unexpected breakthroughs by the Germans, any unexpected attacks. The Breda variant would use that key strategic reserve. Gamelin faithfully chooses to go for the Breda variant and to gamble everything on the German advance through Belgium being their main advance. At 10:20 in the morning, the BEF enter Belgium. The French, British, Belgian and Dutch air forces are also struggling to actually locate the Luftwaffe, as they have no coordinated air defence system, no radar or ground controllers. When scrambled, they struggle to find German aircraft in the sky. The Dutch air force, as we said, are destroyed on the ground, and on the 10th of May, the RAF lose 74 planes. The French lose 75 planes in the sky. But the Germans don't have it all their own way in the air war, and the first day is a gruelingly expensive day for the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe lose 192 fighters and bombers, and another 244 air transport planes, an appallingly high level of loss that is ultimately unsustainable. If the French and British armies can hold in the west, then the Luftwaffe could be ground down by this kind of attrition. By the 12th of May, Army Group B had linked up with its paratroopers and had crossed the Albert Canal in Belgium. The Dutch army had been beaten in just 2 days and was now retreating towards Rotterdam. The French forces racing to Breda had been forced back towards Antwerp, having failed to reach Breda before the Germans. On the 13th of May, the Germans had reached the Dutch coast, and the Belgian army had started to fall back towards the River Dyle to join up with the British and French. But the British and French advance, their race through Belgium, has been badly delayed by huge columns of refugees fleeing the advance of the Germans. Meanwhile, Army Group A, as Guderian had predicted, had got through those layers of obstacles and reached the River Meuse, the key river at which the French intended to hold the Germans in the Ardennes sector. The Germans crossed the Meuse using a footbridge that German troops had also used in 1914. It had been left intact. The French hadn't blown this bridge up, and they'd left it unguarded, and disastrously, that bridge was right at the join between two French corps, so neither French corps actually claimed responsibility for guarding it. Each thought that the other corps would guard that bridge. Rommel crossed using this bridge. The French had not expected the Germans to reach the river for another 12 days or so, and had not yet started to dig in this area. Even so, the French are well positioned. They have a very wide river to defend, and a commanding position as they hold all the high ground, the heights overlooking the river. Army Group A had also ran into terrible trouble. One of the traffic jams going through the Ardennes region was 170 miles long. It was a sitting duck for any Allied air attacks on the few roads in the region. And this column of German vehicles was spotted by Allied aircraft on the 10th of May, and spotted again on the 12th of May. General Corap, however, the French general in charge of the Ardennes region, he was told of the Germans coming towards him and dismissed both reports as patently absurd, and so the air attacks were not ordered. Instead, the Allied aircraft were sent to Belgium to cover their advance into Belgium. Worried about the traffic jam, the German commander, Kleist, orders Rommel and Guderian to halt the advance through the Ardennes and instead to swing towards Sedan. Both of them critically refused to obey the orders of their superior officer and push forward with the plan, crossing the Meuse. The key French position was Hill 301. French artillery was digging in on this hill, watching the crossing. German units reached it just as night was starting to draw in. The German troops were exhausted, but they were led by a man called Balck, a First World War veteran. He said, "What is easy today could be bloody tomorrow." And so he led that attack at 10:30 at night. The French, fighting in the dark, panicked, fled, and abandoned the hill and the dug-in artillery. By the 14th of May, the Germans had crossed the River Meuse. When General Georges, commander of the front, was told, he said, "Our front has been broken at Sedan. There has been a collapse." And he broke down weeping.